The news spread through the galaxy like wildfire. The Galactic Educational Council had made their decision final. No more humans would be allowed in the Advanced Warfare Studies program at the famous Zentari Military Academy. The ban was complete. An absolute. Commander Jake Morrison packed his few belongings into a small metal box. His office at the academy had been his home for 7 years. Now he was leaving forever. The walls were bare, stripped of all the certificates and awards he had earned during his time as an instructor. His hands moved slowly as he placed each item in the box. A coffee mug from Earth, a small photo of his family, a medal from the Luna Station battle. Outside his window, alien students walked across the academy grounds. They came from dozens of different worlds and species. Some looked like giant insects with hard shells. Others seemed to be made of liquid, metal that changed shape as they moved. There were tall ones that looked like walking trees and small ones with big heads and tiny bodies. All of them were here to learn about war and combat, but not humans. Not anymore. Jake closed the box and lifted it. It was lighter than he expected. 7 years of his life weighed almost nothing. He walked to the door and looked back one last time. The room already felt empty, as if he had never been there at all. Tomorrow, an alien instructor would take his place. Someone who understood proper warfare. Someone who was not human. The hallway was busy with students going to their classes. Most of them ignored Jake as he walked past. A few looked at him with curiosity. One or two seemed to smirk as if they were happy to see him go. Jake kept walking, his boots making soft sounds on the polished floor. In the main lobby, other instructors were talking in small groups. Some were his friends, others he barely knew. They all stopped talking when they saw him. The silence was uncomfortable. Number 1 knew what to say to the last human teacher leaving the academy. Professor Elena Rodriguez was waiting by the main entrance. She was the only other human left at the academy, but she taught history, not warfare. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple style, and her brown eyes looked sad but determined. "So this is it," she said quietly. Jake nodded. 3 cycles. They gave us 3 cycles to prove we belonged here. Apparently it was not enough. Elena looked around the lobby. Students were watching them, trying not to be obvious about it. "What will you do now?" "Go back to Earth, I suppose. Maybe teach at the Human Military Academy. Try to forget about this place." Jake shifted the box in his arms. "What about you? Are you staying, for now? Someone needs to keep an eye on things. Make sure they do not forget about us completely." Jake almost smiled. "You always were the stubborn one. Someone has to be." They walked outside together. The academy grounds were beautiful, with purple grass and silver trees that sang in the wind. Jake had loved this place once. Now it felt like a prison he was finally escaping. A transport ship waited on the landing pad. It would take Jake to the space station, where he could catch a ship back to Earth. Other passengers were already boarding. Most were traders and diplomats, none were military. "Jake," Elena said as they reached the ship, "this is not over. You know that, right? It feels pretty over to me. The ban is not about what they say it is about. You know that too?" Jake looked at her carefully. Elena always saw things others missed. It was why she was such a good teacher. "What do you mean?" "The official reason is that humans are too aggressive, too violent, too primitive for modern warfare." Elena spoke quietly so the other passengers could not hear. "But I think the real reason is different." "Different how?" "I think they are afraid of us." Jake frowned. "Afraid, Elena? They have weapons that can destroy entire planets. They have shields that can stop anything we can throw at them. They have technology we can barely understand. Why would they be afraid of us? Because we do not fight like they do. We do not think like they do, and that scares them." The transport. Ship's captain called for final boarding. Jake had to go. He looked at Elena one more time. "Take care of yourself, and try not to cause too much trouble. I make no promises." Jake boarded the ship and found his seat by a small window. As the ship lifted off, he watched the academy get smaller and smaller below him. Soon it was just a tiny dot on the surface of the planet. Then it was gone completely. Inside the academy, students were gathering in the common areas between classes. The news about the human band had been official for weeks, but people were still talking about it. Most of the talk was not kind. Zexai was a Cathany student from the Crystal Worlds. His body looked like it was made of green glass, with 4 arms that moved in sharp, precise motions. He was considered one of the best students in his year. His species had been fighting wars for thousands of years, always with honor and dignity. "I still cannot believe they were ever allowed here in the first place," Zexai said to his study group. His voice made a sound like wind chimes. "Humans fight like animals. No style, no grace, no honor at all," his friend Quolin laughed. Quolin was a Vorthan, a species that could change their shape at will. Right now he looked like a tall human, but his skin had a silver color that shifted like liquid mercury. "I heard they used to fight wars with sticks and stones, can you imagine? Actual rocks thrown by hand. And fire," added another student. This was Vithelin, a cerebral with a head 3 times the size of a normal human head. His brain was visible through his transparent skull, pulsing with different colors as he thought. "They used to burn things. Buildings, forests, even other humans. How barbaric." The group was sitting in the academy's main study hall. Around them, hundreds of other students were reading, talking, or working on assignments. The hall was enormous, with a ceiling so high it seemed to touch the sky. Floating platforms carried students between different levels. Holographic displays showed information from across the galaxy. "My instructor showed us footage from one of their wars," said a student named Crystal. She was a Bruton, 8 feet tall and covered in thick, armor-like skin. Her people were known as great warriors, but they always fought with honor and followed strict rules. The humans were shooting at each other with primitive metal bullets. No shields, no energy weapons, no proper protection at all. Just soft flesh and cloth uniforms. "How did they survive?" asked Colin. "Most of them did not," Crystal replied. "They died by the millions, but they kept fighting anyway. Even when it was hopeless, even when they had no chance of winning." "That is the problem with humans," Zexai said. "They do not know when to stop. They do not understand proper surrender. They just keep fighting until they are all dead. Which is why the council was right to ban them," added Vuffelin. "They are too primitive for modern warfare, too violent, too unpredictable." The other students nodded in agreement. They had all heard the stories about human warfare. The council had made the right decision. Humans simply did not belong in a civilized military academy, but not everyone in the hall agreed with this view. Professor Elena Rodriguez was sitting at a table in the corner, grading papers from her History class. She could hear the students talking about humans and the ban. Their words made her angry, but she kept her face calm and neutral. Elena had been at the academy for 10 years. She had seen many different species come and go. She had watched them learn about war and combat and strategy. But she had also seen something else. She had seen how they reacted when they faced real danger, how they behaved when they're comfortable. Theories met harsh reality. Most alien species had rules about warfare. They had limits on what they would do and what they would sacrifice. They had concepts of acceptable losses and strategic withdrawals. They understood when a fight was not worth fighting. Humans were different. Elena knew this, even if the students did not. She had studied human military history for decades. She knew what humans were capable of when they were truly motivated. When they were fighting for something they believed in, the students thought humans were banned because they were too primitive. Elena suspected the truth was exactly the opposite. Humans were banned because they were too effective, too dangerous, too willing to pay any price for victory. As she listened to the alien students mock her species, Elena made a decision. It was time to show them what human warfare really looked like. It was time to show them why the ban was really put in place. She would need to be careful. The academy authorities would not approve of what she was planning, but the students needed to understand the truth. They needed to see that humans were not banned for being too weak. They were banned for being too strong. 3 weeks had passed since Commander Jake Morrison left the academy. The alien students had almost forgotten about the human ban. Life went on as normal. Classes continued, assignments were completed, and the future military leaders of the galaxy learned about proper warfare. Professor Elena Rodriguez walked through the academy halls every day, listening to conversations and watching the students. She heard them talk about humans with amusement and contempt. They made jokes about human weapons and human tactics. They laughed about human stupidity and human weakness. Elena said nothing. She kept grading papers, teaching her history classes, and waiting for the right moment. She knew it would come eventually. These students were young and confident. They believed they knew everything about war and combat. Sooner or later, they would push too far. The moment came on a Tuesday morning in the main study hall. Elena was sitting at her usual table, working on lesson plans for the next week. The hall was busy with students preparing for their midterm exams. The sound of different languages and communication methods filled the air. Near the center of the hall, a group of students had gathered around a holographic display. They were watching footage from recent battles across the galaxy. The images showed sleek starships firing bright energy beams at each other. Shields sparkled as they absorbed the hits. Everything looked clean and organized and civilized. "Now, this is proper warfare," HFY said, his crystal arms pointing at the display. "Look at the formation discipline, the tactical precision, the honor in combat." Quolin nodded, his silver form rippling with approval. "Each ship knows its role. Each captain follows the rules of engagement. No unnecessary violence, no barbaric behavior." "Unlike humans," added Vathalan, his large brain pulsing with colors that indicated smugness. "I read a report about one of their ancient battles. They used something called fire arrows to attack wooden ships. Can you imagine? Setting things on fire as a weapon?" The group laughed. Other students stopped their work to listen. Soon a small crowd had formed around the display. "My professor showed us footage from a human battle," said a student named Tixon. She was a queller, a species that looked like a cross between a bird and a lizard. Her voice was high and musical. "They were fighting in mud, covered in dirt and blood. No shields, no proper armor, just soft flesh and primitive metal." "How did they survive so long as a species?" asked Krikstal, the 8-foot-tall Bruton warrior. "Luck?" "Mostly," HFY replied, "and breeding. They reproduce very fast, so they can replace their losses quickly." "Like insects," Quolin said with disgust. "Exactly like insects," Vathalan agreed. "No individual skill or honor. Just numbers and mindless aggression." Elena felt her hands tighten around her datapad. The students were not just wrong about humans. They were dangerously wrong. But she forced herself to stay calm and keep listening. "The council made the right decision," continued HFY. "Humans have no place in modern warfare education. They would only drag down the standards of the academy. Plus, they might teach other species their barbaric methods," added Tixon. "We cannot allow that kind of thinking to spread." "Agreed," said Vathalan. "Human warfare is all about causing maximum damage with no regard for honor or civilization. They fight like wild animals." Several students nodded in agreement. The consensus was clear. Humans were too primitive, too violent, too uncivilized. For proper military education, Elena stood up from her table. She walked slowly toward the group of students. Her footsteps were quiet on the polished floor, but somehow the students sensed her approach. They turned to look at her, their various eyes and sensors focusing on the lone human professor. "Excuse me," Elena said politely. "I could not help but overhear your conversation about humans and warfare." The students looked slightly embarrassed. They had been talking loudly, and Elena was the only human left at the academy. Some of them seemed to realize they might have been rude. "Professor Rodriguez," HFY said, his voice making apologetic wind chime sounds. "We were just discussing military history." "Nothing personal, of course." "Of course," Elena replied with a small smile. I understand you have strong opinions about human combat methods. Well, yes, Colin said, his form shifting uncomfortably. The historical record is quite clear. Human warfare lacks the sophistication and honor that characterizes proper military engagement. Interesting, Elena said, nodding thoughtfully. And this opinion is based on your study of human military history? Absolutely, Vathaltham said, his brain pulsing with confidence. We have access to extensive archives about human conflicts. The evidence is overwhelming. I see, Elena said. And what exactly have you learned about human warfare from these archives? The students exchanged glances. They were eager to show off their knowledge to their professor. Humans fight with primitive weapons, Tixon said. Chemical explosives? Metal projectiles, even sharpened sticks. Nothing like our advanced energy systems. They have no shields or proper armor, added Crystal. Just soft flesh protected by basic materials. They engage in mass slaughter with no regard for civilian casualties, Zexhai contributed. Total war, they call it. And they refuse to surrender even when defeat is certain, Quolin finished. They fight until they are all dead, regardless of the cost. Elena listened to each point carefully. Her expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes seemed to shift. The students noticed the change, but could not identify what it meant. Those are very interesting observations, Elena said finally. Tell me, do you believe these characteristics make humans inferior warriors? Obviously, Vathalin said. Modern warfare requires intelligence, strategy, and honor. Humans possess none of these qualities. They are too emotional, Zexhai added, too unpredictable, too willing to sacrifice everything for meaningless causes. In other words, Elena said slowly, you believe humans were banned from the warfare program because they were too primitive to learn proper combat techniques. Exactly, several students said at once. Elena nodded again. She looked around the group, studying each alien face. The students were confident, even arrogant. They believed they understood everything about human warfare. They thought they knew why the ban had been put in place. Would you like to test that theory? Elena asked quietly. The students looked puzzled. Test it how? Quolin asked. I have access to extensive footage of human warfare, Elena said. Real combat situations from across human history. If you truly want to understand why humans were banned from this program, I could show you some examples. The students became excited. Here was a chance to prove their point with actual evidence. They could watch human barbarism firsthand and confirm everything they had been taught. That would be excellent, Vathalin said. When could we arrange this viewing? I could set up a presentation for tomorrow evening, Elena replied. The main lecture hall should be available. Perfect, Zexhai said. This will be educational for everyone. Yes, Elena agreed. I think it will be very educational indeed. Word of the presentation spread quickly through the academy. Students were curious about the chance to see real human warfare footage. Many had heard stories but never seen actual combat records. By the next evening, the main lecture hall was packed with alien students from dozens of species. Elena stood at the front of the hall, looking out at the crowd. The students were talking excitedly among themselves, anticipating confirmation of everything they believed about human primitiveness. They expected to see clumsy, brutal fighting that would justify the ban. Before we begin, Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall, I want you to remember something. The footage you are about to see shows real events. These are not simulations or training exercises. These are actual human beings fighting actual wars. The students settled into their seats, eager to start. They had no idea what they were about to witness. The first segment, Elena continued, comes from a conflict that occurred approximately 150 Earth years ago. The humans involved had no energy weapons, no force fields, no advanced technology of any kind. They fought with what you would call primitive equipment. She activated the holographic display system. The lights in the hall dimmed slightly. The students leaned forward in anticipation. Let us begin with a simple question, Elena said. What do you think makes a warrior truly dangerous? The students were silent, waiting for the answer. Is it their weapons? Elena asked. Their technology? Their training? She paused, looking out at the crowd of alien faces. Or is it something else entirely? The first image appeared on the display. It showed a black and white photograph of human soldiers preparing for battle. They looked young and frightened, carrying simple metal weapons and wearing basic uniforms. Let me show you what human warfare really looks like, Elena said quietly. And then you can decide for yourselves why the ban was really put in place. The students watched in expectant silence, ready to have their beliefs confirmed. They had no idea that everything they thought they knew about human warfare was about to be shattered. The main lecture hall was darker than usual. Professor Elena Rodriguez had dimmed the lights to make the holographic display more visible. Nearly 300 alien students filled the seats, their various forms creating a sea of different shapes and colors in the darkness. Elena stood at the front of the hall, her small human figure dwarfed by the massive space around her. The holographic projector hummed quietly, ready to display the footage she had carefully selected. The students were talking among themselves, excited about what they were going to see. Silence, please, Elena said, her voice carrying clearly. Through the hall, the conversation stopped immediately. All eyes, sensors, and various alien perception organs focused on her. Tonight you will see footage from actual human conflicts, Elena began. These are not training exercises or simulations. These are real battles fought by real people with real consequences. She paused, looking out at the crowd of alien faces. Most showed expressions of eager anticipation. They were ready to see proof of human barbarism and primitiveness. The first footage comes from a conflict called World War II, Elena continued. This war occurred approximately 150 Earth years ago. The humans involved had no energy weapons, no force fields, no faster-than-light communication. They fought with what you consider primitive technology. She activated the holographic display. The first image appeared in the center of the hall, visible from every seat. It showed a grainy black and white recording of human soldiers preparing for battle. The image quality was poor by galactic standards, but the details were clear enough. This is footage from an invasion called D-Day, Elena explained. Human forces were attacking a heavily defended coastline. They knew many of them would die, but they went anyway. The footage began to play. The students watched as landing craft approached a beach under heavy enemy fire. Explosions erupted in the water around the boats. Some craft were hit and sank immediately, taking their passengers down with them. The alien students watched with clinical interest. This was what they had expected to see. Primitive humans using crude tactics and suffering. Massive casualties because of their lack of proper technology, but then the footage showed something unexpected. Despite the heavy fire, despite the explosions and death around them, the human soldiers kept moving forward. When their boats were destroyed, they swam. When their weapons were lost, they picked up new ones from fallen comrades. When they were wounded, they continued fighting. Note the behavior, Elena said quietly. These soldiers know they are likely to die. They can see their friends being killed around them. Logic would suggest they should retreat or surrender. The students nodded. Any civilized species would have withdrawn in the face of such losses, but they do not retreat, Elena continued. They keep moving forward. The footage showed wave after wave of human soldiers storming the beach. Many fell, but others took their place. Slowly, impossibly, they began to gain ground against the defenders. Zexhai shifted in his seat, his crystal form clicking softly. They are just following orders, he said. Mindless obedience to authority, are they? Elena asked. She changed the footage to show individual soldiers making decisions in the heat of battle. Watch this soldier here. The display focused on a single human fighting near a concrete barrier. His unit had been pinned down by enemy fire. The logical action would be to wait for support or retreat to a safer position. Instead, the soldier stood up and charged directly at the enemy position. Alone, the alien students watched in confusion as the human ran across open ground under heavy fire. He was hit multiple times but kept running. When he reached the enemy position, he destroyed it with a hand-thrown explosive, clearing the way for his unit to advance. "That soldier died in that attack," Elena said simply. "His name was Danny Wright. He was 19 years old." The hall was quiet. The students had expected to see human stupidity, but this was something different. The human soldier had made a conscious choice to sacrifice himself for his comrades. "Perhaps that was an unusual case," Quallen said, his silver form rippling with uncertainty, one individual acting irrationally. Elena nodded. "Let me show you another example." She changed the footage to show a different battle. This is from a conflict called the Battle of Thermopylae, approximately 2,500 Earth years ago. The new footage showed a narrow mountain pass. A small force of human warriors stood in formation, facing an enormous army that stretched beyond the horizon. The humans were outnumbered by more than 300 to 1. 300 human warriors, Elena explained, against over 100,000 enemies. The humans had been ordered to hold this pass to give their cities time to prepare for war. The students watched. As the massive enemy army advanced, the logical action for the small human force would be to retreat immediately. No military doctrine in the galaxy would recommend standing and fighting in such a hopeless situation, but the humans did not retreat. They formed a tight battle line and waited for the enemy to reach them. When the attack came, they fought with incredible determination and skill. Despite being vastly outnumbered, they held their position. "The interesting thing," Elena said as the footage continued, "is that these warriors knew they were going to die. Their king had told them before the battle that none of them would return home alive." Vathilin's brain pulsed with confused colors. Then why did they fight? What was the point? "They fought because their duty was to hold the pass," Elena replied. "They fought because their sacrifice would save their families and their cities. They fought because they believed some things were worth dying for." The footage showed the battle continuing for 3 days. The humans fought with bronze weapons and wooden shields against a much larger force with superior numbers. They were finally overwhelmed, but not before inflicting enormous casualties on the enemy and delaying their advance long enough for the Greek cities to prepare their defenses. "Every single one of them died," Elena said quietly. "But their sacrifice changed the course of history." The alien students were no longer talking among themselves. The casual mockery had disappeared from their faces. They were beginning to understand that human warfare was not what they had been taught. Elena changed the footage again. "This is from a more recent conflict," she said. "A battle on a world called Iwo Jima during the same war as the beach invasion." The new footage showed human soldiers fighting on a barren island covered with volcanic rock. The enemy was hidden in caves and tunnels, making the fighting extremely difficult. The humans had to advance across open ground under constant fire. The students watched as human soldiers threw themselves on enemy explosives to protect their comrades. They saw wounded men refusing medical evacuation so they could continue fighting. They watched as units advanced into certain death because their mission required it. "This battle lasted for 36 days, Elena explained. The humans could have bypassed this island. They could have used long-range weapons to destroy it from space. Instead, they chose to fight for every meter of ground because they believed it was necessary." One clip showed a human soldier named Carl Peterson crawling across open ground while severely wounded. He was trying to reach a fallen comrade who was trapped in enemy fire. Peterson was hit several more times during the rescue attempt but continued, crawling until he reached the other soldier. "Peterson died saving that man," Elena said. "The man he saved was not even from his unit. He had known him for less than a week." The hall was completely silent now. The students were no longer seeing primitive barbarism. They were seeing something they had never encountered before in their studies of warfare. "Let me show you one more example," Elena said. She activated footage from a more recent conflict. This is from the Korean War, approximately 70 Earth years ago. The new footage showed a small group of human soldiers surrounded by enemy forces on a frozen hilltop. They were outnumbered and running low on ammunition. The logical action would be to surrender and avoid further casualties. Instead, the humans fought for 3 days in sub-zero temperatures. When their ammunition ran out, they used improvised weapons. When their weapons broke, they fought with their bare hands. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found the humans still fighting, even though most of them were wounded. The unit commander was asked later why they did not surrender, Elena said. He replied that surrender was not an option because they had a job to do. The footage showed the aftermath of the battle. The human soldiers, frostbitten and exhausted, were still trying to maintain their defensive positions even as medical teams treated their wounds. Elena turned off the holographic display. The lights in the hall slowly returned to normal. The alien students sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. These are just a few examples, Elena said quietly. Human military history is filled with similar stories. Individuals and units choosing to fight impossible battles, refusing to abandon their comrades, seeing death as preferable to dishonor. She looked out at the sea of alien faces. The mockery and contempt had been replaced by something else entirely. Something that looked almost like fear. Now, Elena continued, I want you to think about something. These humans fought with primitive weapons and no advanced technology. They had no shields, no energy weapons, no sophisticated battlefield management. The silence in the lecture hall stretched for several minutes after Professor Elena Rodriguez finished speaking. 300 alien students sat in their seats, staring at the empty holographic display where they had just witnessed something that challenged everything they thought they knew about human warfare. Elena waited patiently. She could see the confusion and uncertainty on their faces. The casual mockery and contempt were gone, replaced by something much more complex. Some students looked thoughtful. Others seemed worried. A few appeared genuinely frightened. Finally, Tixon raised one of her bird-like arms. Her musical voice trembled slightly as she spoke. Professor Rodriguez, those battles you showed us, were they typical of human warfare? Define typical, Elena replied calmly. I mean, do all humans fight like that with such disregard for their own survival? Elena considered the question carefully. Not all humans are soldiers, if that is what you are asking. But when humans do fight, when they are truly committed to a cause they believe in, then yes. This behavior is quite common. Quolina's silver form had stopped its usual flowing motion and had become almost rigid. But it makes no sense from a survival perspective. Why would any species evolve such self-destructive tendencies? Perhaps, Elena said, because they are not self-destructive. Perhaps they are species protective. The students looked puzzled. Elena activated the holographic display again, but this time she showed a simple diagram instead of battle footage. Consider this, she said. A human soldier sacrifices his life to save his unit. From an individual perspective, this seems irrational. But from a group perspective, it ensures the survival of many at the cost of one. The diagram showed mathematical calculations demonstrating how individual sacrifice could benefit group survival. The alien students studied it with interest. But there are more efficient ways to achieve group survival, Vothelin protested, his large brain pulsing with analytical colors. Better tactics, superior technology, strategic withdrawal when necessary. Why choose the most costly option? Because humans do not always choose the most efficient option, Elena replied. They choose the option that aligns with their values. Honor, loyalty, protection of the innocent, defense of freedom. These concepts matter more to humans than efficiency or survival. She changed the display to show footage from a different type of conflict. This time, the images showed human peacekeeping forces in various locations across Earth's history. This footage comes from humanitarian missions, Elena explained. Humans entering dangerous situations not to conquer or gain territory, but to protect civilians who cannot protect themselves. The students watched as human soldiers risked their lives to evacuate wounded civilians from war zones. They saw medics running into enemy fire to treat injured people from both sides of conflicts. They witnessed soldiers sharing their food and water with refugees even when their own supplies were limited. These humans gain nothing from these actions, Elena pointed out. No territory, no resources, no strategic advantage. They help simply because they believe it is the right thing to do. Crystal, the towering Bruton warrior, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. This is unusual behavior for a military force. Is it? Elena asked. Or is it exactly the kind of behavior you would expect from humans? She showed more footage, this time from natural disasters on Earth. Human soldiers and civilians worked together to rescue people from floods, earthquakes, and storms. They risked their own lives repeatedly to save strangers. During Hurricane Katrina, Elena explained, showing images of the rescue efforts, human soldiers and volunteers saved over 33,000 people from the flooding. Many of the rescuers had no training for this type of work. They simply saw people in danger and decided to help. The alien students watched in fascination as human civilians used their own boats to navigate dangerous floodwaters, searching for survivors. Some of these volunteers were elderly or disabled themselves, but they still participated in the rescue efforts. This behavior extends beyond warfare, Elena continued. Humans consistently choose to help others even at personal cost, even when there is no logical reason to do so. She changed the footage again, showing scenes from various human conflicts throughout history. But this time she focused on specific individuals and their actions. This soldier is named Marcus Williams, Elena said, highlighting a figure in the display. During the Vietnam War, his unit was ambushed and pinned down. Williams was wounded but managed to reach a radio. Instead of calling for extraction, he called in artillery fire on his own position to stop the enemy advance. The students watched as the artillery shells exploded around Williams' location. The enemy attack was stopped, but Williams died in the bombardment he had requested. He could have tried to escape, Elena noted. He could have surrendered. Instead, he chose to sacrifice himself to give his comrades a chance to survive. But why? Zexhai asked, his crystal form clicking with agitation. What could possibly motivate such behavior? Elena smiled sadly. Love, loyalty, duty, the belief that some things are more important than individual survival. She showed another clip, this one featuring a female soldier named Amy Johnson. During a battle in Afghanistan, Johnson's convoy was attacked by a much larger enemy force. When her commanding officer was killed, Johnson took command and organized the defense. Johnson was a supply clerk, Elena explained as the footage played. She had minimal combat training. But when her unit needed a leader, she stepped up. The students watched as Johnson coordinated the defense, moving between positions under heavy fire to check on her soldiers and redistribute ammunition. When the unit's radio was damaged, she ran across open ground to reach a backup communication device. She was wounded 3 times during the battle, Elena continued, but refused medical attention until all her soldiers were evacuated. The footage showed Johnson still giving orders and checking on her troops even as medics tried to treat her wounds. The unit held their position for 6 hours against overwhelming odds, Elena said. Johnson's leadership saved the lives of 18 soldiers. Quillen S form began to flow again, but the movement seemed agitated. These are extraordinary individuals. Surely not all humans behave this way, Elena nodded. You are correct. Not every human is a soldier, and not every soldier is a hero. But the capacity for this kind of behavior exists in most humans. The willingness to sacrifice for others, to fight for principles rather than profit, to choose honor over survival. She activated a new series of clips, these showing human soldiers in more recent conflicts. The technology was more advanced, but the behavior was remarkably similar. This footage is from the recent conflict between Earth and the Zentari Empire, Elena said quietly. The engagement that led to humanity's integration into the Galactic Council. The students leaned forward with interest. They had heard about this conflict, but most of the details had been classified. The battle took place at Luna Station, one of Earth's orbital facilities, Elena continued. A Zentari battle fleet attacked the station as part of their expansion into human space. The Footage showed the massive alien warships approaching the small human station. The technological disparity was obvious. The Zentari ships had energy shields, plasma weapons, and armor that could withstand most human weapons. The station's garrison consisted of 200 human marines, Elena explained. They were facing a fleet of 50 warships with a combined crew of over 30,000 Zentari soldiers. The students watched as the battle began. The human weapons seemed primitive compared to the Zentari technology, but the humans fought with the same determination they had seen in the historical footage. The Zentari fleet commander expected the station to surrender immediately, Elena sighed. Instead, the humans fought for 6 hours against impossible odds. The footage showed human soldiers continuing to fight even as sections of the station were destroyed around them. When their heavy weapons were knocked out, they used small arms. When their small arms ran out of ammunition, they improvised weapons from maintenance equipment. The station's commander was Jake Morrison, Elena said, and several students recognized the name of the human instructor, who had recently left the academy. The footage showed Morrison coordinating the defense even as the command center was damaged by enemy fire. When the main communications array was destroyed, he continued giving orders through hand signals and written messages. When the Zentari finally boarded the station, Elena continued, they found the surviving humans still fighting with whatever they could find: pieces of metal, tools, even broken furniture. The alien students watched in stunned silence as the footage showed human Marines fighting Zentari soldiers hand-to-hand in the corridors of the damaged station. The Zentari fleet commander later reported that he had never encountered resistance like this, Elena said. His exact words were, "These humans fight like beings possessed by demons. They refuse to accept defeat even when defeat is certain." The footage ended with the capture of the surviving humans. Even as they were being restrained, some were still trying to fight. The battle at Luna Station convinced the Zentari Empire to seek peace rather than continue the war, Elena concluded. They realized that conquering humanity would cost them more than they were willing to pay. The lecture hall was completely. The main lecture hall remained silent for several long minutes after Professor Elena Rodriguez finished showing the footage from Luna Station. 300 alien students sat in their seats, processing what they had witnessed. The casual mockery and contempt they had shown for human warfare just hours earlier had completely disappeared. Elena stood at the front of the hall watching their faces. She could see the wheels turning in their minds as they tried to understand the implications of what they had learned. The truth about the human band was finally becoming clear to them. Zexhai was the first to speak. His crystal form had lost much of its earlier confidence, and his voice made uncertain chiming sounds. "Professor Rodriguez, if humans fight as effectively as you have shown us, why did Earth agree to the ban? Why did your people accept exclusion from advanced warfare training?" Elena had been waiting for this question. It was the final piece of the puzzle that the students needed to understand. "That is an excellent question," she replied. "To answer it, I need to show you one more piece of footage. This comes from the aftermath of the Luna Station battle." She activated the holographic display again. The new footage showed a meeting room aboard a large Zentari warship. The Zentari fleet commander, a tall alien with blue skin and 4 arms, was sitting across from a small group of human diplomats. "This is the peace negotiation that ended the human-Zentari conflict," Elena explained. "The Zentari commander is Admiral Vexmon. The humans are Earth's diplomatic team." The students watched as the peace talks began. Admiral Vexmon spoke. First, his voice showing clear signs of stress and exhaustion. "Your species fights unlike anything we have encountered," the Admiral said to the human diplomats. "Our projections indicated that your resistance would collapse within hours. Instead, you held Luna Station for 6 hours against our entire fleet." The lead human diplomat, a middle-aged woman named Carol Henderson, nodded politely. "Our people were defending their home. They did what they thought was necessary." "Necessary?" Admiral Vexman's 4 arms gestured in agitation. "Your soldiers fought with broken furniture when their weapons failed. They continued attacking even when they We're dying. This is not normal military behavior. Perhaps not by your standards, Henderson replied calmly. But it is normal for humans when we are protecting something we value. The alien students in the lecture hall watched this exchange with growing understanding. They were beginning to see the peace negotiations from a very different perspective than they had been taught. Admiral Lexman, Henderson continued in the footage, what are your casualty projections for a full invasion of Earth? The Admiral's expression became even more troubled. Unacceptable. If your soldiers on Luna Station represent typical human resistance, we estimate losses of 60 to 70% of our forces to successfully occupy your planet. And that assumes you could hold it afterward, Henderson added quietly. Which you could not. Humans do not accept occupation well. Elena paused the footage and looked out at her students. The Zentari Empire had conquered 23 worlds. Before encountering Earth, their usual casualty rate for planetary invasion was 3 to 5%. Facing humans, they were looking at losses of more than half their military. She resumed the footage. Admiral Lexman was speaking again. We propose a peace treaty, the Admiral said. The Zentari Empire will recognize Earth's sovereignty and establish normal diplomatic relations. In return, we ask that humans agree to certain restrictions on military expansion. Henderson leaned forward slightly. What kind of restrictions? We want assurance that humans will not spread their military doctrines to other species? We want human participation in galactic warfare education programs to be limited. And we want advance notice of any human military deployments outside your home system. The students in the lecture hall were shocked. The mighty Zentari Empire, which had conquered dozens of worlds, was asking for protection from humans. Henderson considered the Admiral's requests carefully. The restrictions you describe are quite extensive. What does the Zentari Empire offer in return? Full membership in the Galactic Council, Admiral Lexman replied. Access to our trade networks, our technology, our knowledge, everything we offer to other member species. Everything except military training, Henderson noted. Yes, military training remains restricted. Elena paused the footage again. The human diplomatic team spent 3 days considering this offer. Let me show you their final response. The new footage showed the same meeting room, but now the human delegation looked tired. Henderson sat across from Admiral Lexman, a formal document in her hands. Admiral, we have reviewed your proposal, Henderson said. Earth accepts the peace treaty and membership in the Galactic Council. Admiral Lexman looked relieved. And the military restrictions? We agree to those as well, Henderson replied. The Admiral's relief was obvious. Excellent. May I ask what convinced your government to accept these limitations? Henderson smiled, and Elena noticed that it was the same kind of smile she had seen on Elena's face during her lectures. A smile that did not quite reach the eyes. Admiral, you have seen what humans can do with primitive weapons and no advanced training. You have calculated the cost of fighting us. But you have not considered what we might become if we learned your advanced warfare techniques. Admiral Lexman nodded. That is precisely what concerns us. Then you understand why we accept the restrictions, Henderson continued. Not because we are afraid of you, but because we are afraid of ourselves. The alien students in the lecture hall stirred uneasily. This was not the answer they had expected. Explain, please, Admiral Lexman said in the footage. Henderson set down the peace treaty and looked directly at the Zentari commander. Admiral, imagine human soldiers with your energy weapons. Imagine human tactics combined with your shield technology. Imagine human determination backed by your starship fleets. She paused, letting the implications sink in. Now imagine that force unleashed on the galaxy. How many species would survive the encounter? Admiral Lexman was silent for a long moment. Finally, he spoke quietly. Very few. Exactly, Henderson said. The restrictions you propose do not protect you from human aggression. They protect the galaxy from human effectiveness. Elena stopped the footage and turned to face her students. The lecture hall was completely silent. Earth agreed to the military restrictions, Elena explained, because we understood that our way of fighting combined with advanced galactic technology, might destabilize the peace that so many species had worked to achieve. Quilina's silver form was flowing nervously. You are saying that humans accepted the ban to protect other species from yourselves? In part, yes, Elena replied. But also because we recognize that some fights are not worth winning. Peace has value, cooperation has value. Sometimes the greatest victory is achieved through restraint rather than force. Vathalin's brain was pulsing rapidly with confused colors. But if humans are so effective in warfare, why do you not simply take what you want? Why negotiate at all? Elena smiled, and this time it was a genuine expression. Because taking what we want through force would make us the kind of species we chose not to become. Humans value honor, justice, and freedom. We cannot protect these values by destroying them. She activated the display one final time, showing images of human and alien cooperation across the galaxy. Space stations where different species work together, joint exploration missions, shared scientific research. The ban on human military education remains in place, Elena said. But look what we have accomplished together in peacetime. Humans and aliens working side by side, sharing knowledge, exploring the universe together. Tixine raised her arm again. Professor Rodriguez, do you think the ban will ever be lifted? Elena considered the question carefully. I do not know. That decision will be made by future generations, both human and alien. But I hope that when they make that choice, they will remember what you have learned here today. She looked out at the crowd of alien students. You came here believing that humans were banned because we were too primitive for advanced warfare training. Now you know the truth. We were banned because we might be too effective. The students began to talk among themselves, their voices, creating a mixture of sounds and languages that filled the hall. But the tone was very different from their earlier conversations. The mockery and contempt were gone. Replaced by respect and perhaps a touch of healthy fear, Elena gathered her materials and prepared to leave. As she walked toward the exit, Zexai called out to her. Professor Rodriguez, what should we do with this knowledge? Elena stopped and looked back at the young alien student. Remember it, she said simply. Remember that the galaxy chose peace over power. Remember that humans chose restraint over conquest. And remember that the greatest warriors are sometimes those who choose not to fight. She left the lecture hall, knowing that the students would spend hours discussing what they had learned. The truth about the human ban would spread throughout the academy and beyond. Future galactic leaders would understand that humanity's greatest strength was not just their ability to fight, but their wisdom to know when fighting was not the answer. The ban would remain in place, protecting the galaxy from what humans might become if they ever combined their natural tenacity.